All right, I'm going to click to take us live. Click. And
Wow.
we're live. It is Friday, June 4th, 2021, 5:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:02 p.m. a.m. Estonia time, I think. Maybe midnight Estonia time, I'm not sure. Alina Polyakova is joining us from the treadmill because we are that kind of a show where we encourage that sort of thing. She is also decked out in a American flag shawl, showing the kind of patriotism that we expect of our guests because we call them great Americans at the end of the show. So
Exactly.
it's important to earn that. We are not
Also,
allowed
like,
to
who
have fun.
looks like this when they exercise? Alina looks like this when she exercises.
Well, I've had a year to get used to walking on a treadmill for all of my Zoom calls.
That's
I
it's an
I
amazing idea.
use now this has been a source of friction between me and some of the lawfare staff. I have an under the desk elliptical which I use during a lot of Zoom meetings, and a bunch of my staff really hate it, and they find it unnerving and
What, just the noise of it, or like that there's like,
no, the fact that my shoulders go like this.
oh
The
yeah.
fact that I seem to be moving and yet am sitting still, people find it jarring, and I don't care. There are many ways in which I strive to make people not uncomfortable, but that's not one of them.
I'm
We are
going to get this. I'm going to get this wall art for you, Ben. This is what your under the desk elliptical reminds me of. I just put it in the chat.
Oh yes, people have sent me that after many a Zoom meeting, and I just want to say that is actually my life: retaining a surface calm while frantically paddling underneath.
Mm.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but I want to say we're having more fun than certain people in Belarus are being allowed to have. So, Alina, let's start there. What is the latest from Belarus?
Well, the timing of our not so fun conversation really couldn't be better or worse, depends on how you look at it. Um, so, there's some recent developments over the long, protracted, and now escalating mess that Lukashenko has caused with his uh, plane hijacking and arrest of a journalist and his girlfriend who are on board. He's been in prison this entire time since the end of May 27th, I believe. And today there was a video confession, so-called confession, released by the government, where he admitted uh, to planning a anti-government coup rebellion against Lukashenko, and showed remorse for all of his actions. And of course, the most gruesome part is there many journalists noted that if you zoomed in on his hands, there were a lot of marks on his hands. It definitely looked like he had been tortured. At least that's what people allege and suspect. And obviously, that's not outside the realm of possibilities, and very likely that's exactly what happened. And it was just a very depressing thing to see. And in response to that, the EU has now banned Belarus airlines from flying over all EU space. And many are pushing for sanctions at the G7 summit that's coming up in just a few less than 2 weeks here, actually. So that's what's going on in Belarus. And that is where we currently are.
So, where is who prohibited from flying now? For a while, the Russians were threatening to keep out of their airspace any planes that were not flying over Belarusian airspace. Has that materialized? Is there basically a I won't let you fly in mine if you don't fly in Lukashenko's kind of thing going on, or is that bluster on Putin's part?
So I have not seen the Russians make that official policy. There's certainly been, some statements around that, that, if you do this, we do that. But so far, I haven't seen anything. That doesn't mean it might not change in the next hour or less. But so far, it does seem like the Russians have decided to not get as deeply involved in this. After all, this is not, to their mind, really about Russia. It's about Belarus, and to a certain extent, the Russians have to be careful how they deal with Europe. Europe is still Russia's biggest export market when it comes to gas. And the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, we can get into that a little bit, but that comes into this calculation as well, I think. We are almost done, but we meaning Gazprom. I don't know why I said the we, but the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is 95% finished. It'll probably get finished for the next couple of weeks. The Biden administration hedged on really putting an end to it, probably to try to save the Germany relationship. And so the Russians want to be careful about how they approach Europe here. And I don't think they're willing to potentially ruin this really important project or cause any kind of economic pain to themselves. And they're not going to die on the Belarus sword, basically.
So, how does the new airplane no-fly policy differ from the one put in place by the EU immediately after the hijacking of the flight?
That's a great question. My understanding is that this was part of the initial plan already to institute this ban. I think it's a coincidence, from what I can tell, that it happened at the same time as we had this interview with the journalist published. But it was the ban that was initially previewed early, and it has now come into effect, is my understanding.
One more question before I let Kate take over. Why are we going ahead with this summit?
Your guess is as good as mine there. I've been a skeptic of the summit for a while, as you probably know. I don't really see a plan in place. I think the only thing I can imagine is maybe the administration has a bunch of deals they're hoping to make at the G7, all the summits previous, the G7 with NATO, where they're going to, maybe they'll find a way to have a great anti-kleptocracy, anti-illicit finance coalition is going to have some serious pain potentially for Russia and all the Russian oligarchs, including Mr. Putin. But I am very skeptical that is doable. Nothing has certainly been previewed that would be at that level of seriousness. So I don't know why we are having the summit at all.
Yeah. So how is this gonna, let's say the summit goes forward, but let's say that all of these bans on airspace continue. And how does this end? Does this end how does what are the avenues for this to play out, basically? One avenue is obviously that something drastic changes that seems incredibly unlikely, and they return, they release I don't know how to say his last name, but they release the journalist back, and he's allowed to leave. Another is that he's disappeared or killed in some way, and this ban keeps going indefinitely. Another is the ban just kind of fades, they put a time, places put a time limit on it, or just this isn't as urgent a crisis anymore, and they, without announcing it, places just kind of lift the ban. What do you think the outcome is going to be?
It's hard to predict. And the journalist's name, yes, it is a kind of difficult Russian name, sort of, Roman Prostasevich.
Thank you.
Yes. I think there's a short game here and there's a long game. I think in the short term, seems clear that Belarus is likely to just increasingly become a pariah state, even more so than it was before. I think, as we talked about before, I think last time I talked to you guys on Lawfare, there's the irony here is that for years, Lukashenko had been trying to play both sides. He'd been making some approaches to the West and to some extent the United States. The fact that we even have an ambassador to Belarus is a big deal. She's not there right now, as far as I know, but she's an ambassador to Belarus, and we haven't had that. Under the Obama administration, we started to see more dialogue, even at the military level, which was not something we did before. So there were good steps being taken to give Belarus a bit of an opening and say, we know you're bad, but if you're willing to make some concessions, there's a path here potentially, a very, very light touch. And now that seems to be completely closed off. I mean, completely. And so the only reality here is that Belarus just becomes a satellite state of Russia, I think, at this point. I mean, they have no one else to look to. And of course, the Belarusian people will suffer the most because it will have economic hardship, but they'll probably find ways to get their products